Welcome in to Daily Faceoff Live, your go-to source for everything hockey. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into a Tuesday, November 7th edition of Daily Faceoff Live. He's former NHL player and my friend Colby Cohen. Colby, how you doing?
And your former teammate, Frank. You always
former
forget to add that in there.
Yeah, I know.
You did play hockey.
Most people wouldn't believe that. But Daily Faceoff Live today is presented by our friends at Betano.ca. The game starts now at Betano. 19 plus, please play responsibly. All the action you can get your hands on. A little NBA action on this Tuesday night if you want it. I saw someone hammer the Matthias Ekholm first goal of the game for a pretty decent price on Monday evening. But Colby, let's start there with the Edmonton Oilers, who absolutely self-destructed in Vancouver. About as perfect a start as you could possibly imagine, out shooting the Canucks 19-2. And then Vancouver gets their first goal and the wheels fall off. What happened?
Yeah, I stayed up late for this one, Frank, and I got to tell you, disappointed to see this effort and to see the Oilers become so unraveled so easily. They are so fragile right now, Frank. And that tells me that all this negativity is getting to the dressing room. I mean, the habits, Frank, are really bad on the ice right now for that Edmonton Oilers team.
Let's talk about those habits, because you watched and broke down that second goal scored by the Canucks that really almost – it kind of felt like even the first one went in and you could see the Oilers sag and deflate. Less than 2 minutes later, the second one is behind Stuart Skinner and in the back of their net. What did you see? Break down the clip for us.
Yeah, and it's always shift after a goal, Frank. And just start with looking at the time. I mean, 6:55, the Oilers dump the puck. It's a bad dump. You've got to take pride in where you dump the puck. You can't just give it back to the other team. But okay, you're in a set breakout, 6:45 on the clock. You're okay. But then all of a sudden, one pass, and look at all that space in the neutral zone. Then you've got Kulak and Foegele duplicating down the wall. They're puck watching, and Pius Suter is just wide open in the slot. How do you, as an NHL team, go from perfect set breakout position to that? It's unacceptable. You've got Holloway and Draisaitl all the way up the ice. Ian Cole is behind the net at a dead stop. You should never give up a goal on a play like that. But the Oilers go for a change. The defensemen never gap up. Kulak's gap was awful throughout that clip. Absolutely awful. These are NHL defensemen making millions of dollars. And then to duplicate down the wall like that, Frank, you coach your son's 9 and 10-year-old team. That's the kind of stuff you see when you're coaching 9 and 10-year-olds, not NHL players. And when you start to really dissect that clip and you see the bad habits up and down the ice, the lack of accountability for these players to defend hard, to defend spaces, to change hard, to gap up, to dump the puck well. Bruce Cassidy used to harp on our teams in Providence and Boston to dump the puck well. You're not just giving the puck up. You're putting it to an area so you can recover it. This does not smell good for Jay Woodcroft. Sorry.
So Colby, let's say you have all these breakdowns, okay? And the defensive zone coverage, as you pointed out in the clip, is soft. Wouldn't you just expect a stop from your goalie at that point? Like, why can't the Oilers just get a stop as their league worst save percentage goaltending continues with Stuart Skinner allowing 6 to the Canucks?
Listen, I said it on Tyler's show last week. I know I pissed a lot of people off, but constantly goaltending is a problem. It's deflating when you're sitting on the bench and a soft one goes in. It's very deflating. But on that goal, yeah, it's soft. He should have that save. But again, you're putting a guy in Suter. You're giving him basically a free play to the net. I mean, the time and space that Suter was given there to walk into the slot, pick his spot. Yeah, again, it doesn't go bar down. He doesn't deke around him. So you want to see Skinner make that save. But again, to me, that's just as much on Foegele and Kulak and not having good gaps in the neutral zone and giving Vancouver all that space. And again, that's not the first line. We're not talking about Pettersson and we're not talking about Hughes making that play. That starts with Ian Cole behind the net. Pius Suter's the goal scorer. there's plenty of blame to go around here on that goal in particular. Yeah, they're not getting good goaltending. And Woodcroft said as much after the game. There's ones that they would like to have back, and it's very deflating. But breakdowns, Frank, one after another, not managing the puck, not defending hard, not gapping up. These are not concepts that are, hard concepts. These are basic concepts.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. Also, I think it's fair to expect at some point that when you make these mistakes, that at some point your goalie will bail you out. Connor McDavid said over the weekend, it feels like death by 1,000 cuts. Every single mistake the Oilers make ends up in the back of their own net. So let's talk about a situation as this team continued to unravel throughout the game. You see Connor McDavid get in the face of JT Miller. You see frustration all over the ice. The body language was poor from the Oilers, who now sit at 2-8-1 and maybe a welcome treat against the San Jose Sharks coming up. But you see Jay Woodcroft also lose his cool behind the bench. So I'm going to ask you, fair or foul, Jay Woodcroft becomes the second coach ejected in a week. Greg Cronin previously in Pittsburgh with the Anaheim Ducks. And you see him exiting the ice here. This was really odd to me because it's a play, the puck's coming up ice. All of a sudden you see the game blown dead and bench minor followed by a game misconduct. Yes, NHL coaches and GMs, Colby, were warned before the season started at a meeting in Chicago saying, hey, you embarrass the officials, you're going to be fined, you're going to be tossed from the game. Fair or foul? I say it's foul. If you are, let's just take a quick listen to Jay Woodcroft after the game.
I asked about the play on Holloway. And, it wasn't not profanity laced or anything like that. It was a question. It wasn't well received when I asked the question. And in the end, I got to be better. I can't take a penalty to put our team down. But I didn't think it crossed the line at all. But it was sometimes the way you send a message or ask a question, the way it's received might be not in the manner you intended to. And in the end, the reason I asked that question, I thought it was similar to the penalty that McDavid took to go down 4-3. So I thought it was a fair question. He didn't, and in the end, I got to be better.
Look, I'm all for Colby. If you're going to, during a stoppage in play, berate the official, hands gesturing everywhere, profanity, whatever it is that you're throwing at him, okay, fine. Make an example of him and toss him out of the game. But during play, without profanity, as you have someone skating up the ice, is that rabbit ears? I think this is foul.
I agree. I do. I think if we're taking Woodcroft at his word, which I don't see why we wouldn't, because obviously, there's always microphones and cameras around. So it's hard to kind of get away with stuff like that. Now, if you're not swearing at the official, you should not be tossed out of the game like that. I think that's quite ridiculous. I think referees talk shit to players all the time. They say stuff back to coaches all the time. So it is a little bit of a two-way street. Usually getting in an official's face and swearing is where you cross the line and see a guy get thrown out. But to me, I don't like seeing this. I don't like the precedent for this. I think that they need to have a little bit of a thicker skin.
We'll also get to later in the show the really exciting Leafs and Lightning game. We'll have Erik Eriendsson joining us from lightninginsider.com shortly, but wanted to look ahead, Colby, to tonight's game with the Buffalo Sabres, because Matthew Savoie is making his NHL debut. This is a highly touted prospect, 9th overall in 2022, picked by the Sabres. He had a 6-game conditioning stint loan in Rochester, in which he put up nearly a point per game. And as he makes his debut, what are you most looking forward to for a guy that this Buffalo team, Colby, after starting 2-4, has really turned things around? They've gotten back to level ground at 6-6 and seem to be kind of taking off and heading in the right direction.
Well, look, he had 38 goals last year in the WHL, right? So let's just call it an even 40, which is pretty impressive. And, I look at these types of players, these guys who maybe aren't ready to play in the NHL, but they're probably too good to play in junior, Frank. So it'll be interesting to see how he does at the NHL level. And if Buffalo feels that there's a fit for him in the NHL the rest of the year, of course, once he goes past 10 games, they burn that first year of rookie eligibility. Personally, I think that rule needs to change. I think every team should be awarded 2 waivers for prospects that are too good to be playing junior hockey at the age of 19, but they're not quite ready for the NHL. I think if we're truly serious about developing players the right way and homegrown players in the NHL, I think that would be much better for players' developments and guys like Savoie.
Couldn't agree more. I've been saying forever, I think even just having one exemption from that rule to put one player in the AHL, if you feel like that's the best fit. Obviously, there's players born in Europe that aren't subject to the same thing. It kind of makes the rule stand out a little bit.
And
to
college
me.
players.
Yeah, and college players as well. But college players, of course, tend to just stay in the NCAA until they're ready, as they well should, which makes it an even more intriguing development path. I'm really excited to see Matt Savoie make his debut tonight for the Sabres. I think if you're able to add one more, young piece into an already promising group, and he can pick up some of the slack offensively for this team, not that there often is much, I don't know, becomes a really interesting spot, especially as we get closer to Patrick Kane making his decision. Man, you add another player like Showtime into the mix, it would be pretty impressive.
I love how you throw in that little Kane jab. And just one more point on Savoie. You look at this guy, he got injured during the prospect challenge in training camp. So he doesn't get the full training camp. So it's very difficult then to go to the American League, which is a hard league, and put up a point a game. I mean, that is very impressive for a guy with very little to no pro experience. So I wouldn't be shocked to see him do well and do well quickly at the NHL level, but I do think we should afford a little bit of patience with Savoie.
No doubt. Let's talk about the Boston Bruins, who topped the Dallas Stars in Big D on Monday night. This was a matchup that didn't really receive a ton of attention for as well as both of these teams had started. All eyes were kind of fixed on the train wreck that is the Oilers. And then if you happen to glimpse at the Leafs and Lightning and what happened there, as mentioned, we'll get to Erik Eriendsson in a second from Lightning Insider. But I thought this was an incredibly impressive showing by the Bruins, up 2-0 in that game, able to hang on with a push from the Stars in the third, and some depth scoring from the Bees as they get first NHL goals on a big night from Mason Lohrei and John Beecher. Pretty impressive stuff, Colby.
Yeah, look, I actually got to do Mason Lohrei's last game in the NCAA tournament for Ohio State before he turned pro. And you could just see this kid oozing with ability, 6'5", skates well, passes the puck well. I mean, an absolute gem of a draft pick by Don Sweeney in the second round by the Boston Bruins. And he's actually been better in the 3 NHL games he's played than he was in the American League and that he was at Ohio State towards the end of the season and in the NCAA tournament. So this is an example of a guy who's succeeding and better at the higher level because of the other plays around him. Now, quickly pivoting to John Beecher, this guy's had a story. It hasn't been an easy journey. He's a first-round pick from 2019. He spends a bunch of time in college, loses almost an entire season of college to a torn labrum in his shoulder, which is a major 6-7 month recovery, turns pro, makes the team right out of training camp, having a great training camp, being a fourth line, straight line, up and down the ice type of player. Look, when you're cap strapped, Frank, you need cheap labor, and Beecher and Lohrei are both cheap labor. So good to see those two youngsters getting their first goals. Again, the Boston Bruins continue to surprise us. Everybody thought this would be a down year for them. No Charlie McAvoy, no Matt Grzelcyk. They've been without Lindholm at time. How about Kevin Shattenkirk, a good friend, a teammate of mine from Boston University? I'm rocking the sweatshirt today. He's played really well for the Boston Bruins, playing up, 20, 22 minutes a night right now, filling in on that top power play. Looks re-energized, coming from Anaheim over to Boston. He really has looked good, and give Montgomery credit, man. Those players are playing their asses off for him. They seem to want to go through a wall for him. So I expect the Bruins, with that strong goaltending tandem, Edmonton Oilers, you should be calling the Boston Bruins about Linus Ullmark. I think they're going to keep winning.
I mean, they've shown no signs, especially in the regular season, that that's going to change. The best regular season team in NHL history has continued on almost a pretty similar trajectory this season, beating a team in Dallas that has quietly been excellent this season, and also some history as well. Mason Lohrei, as we mentioned, He's the first NHL player born in the state of Louisiana. Well, now he's the first NHL player to score a goal from the state of Louisiana. His dad, a former pro coach. So fun little nugget with that as well. Let's talk Tampa Bay Lightning now with our Lightning Insider from lightninginsider.com, Erik Eriendsson. That's right. And our All 32 segment today is delivered by our friends at DoorDash. For a limited time, our listeners can get 25% off and 0 delivery fees on their first order of $15 or more when you download the DoorDash app and enter code NATION25. Don't worry about cooking dinner or running to the store. Let it all come to you with DoorDash. Dash that for the win. As mentioned, joined by Lightning insider Erik Eriendsson. Erik, a disappointing loss for the Bolts on Monday night in Toronto after holding a commanding 4-1 lead in the first period. And we've been talking all show long about some goaltending issues around the league. The big topic on Monday was, when's Andrei Vasilevsky going to come back? We finally got some insight from John Cooper. He said it'll be disappointing for him if it's in December and not November. But when you look at Jonas Johansson and the job that he's done to this point, it's mostly been pretty serviceable. Do you have any concerns with him over these last 3 games here? 4-4 and 6 goals against, an .865 save percentage. This is the most games he's ever played sort of in a row at the NHL level. What do you make of where his game's at right now?
I think his game has been fine, to be honest. He's, the goals against certainly look ugly, but it's not him. It's what's going on in front of him. They're kind of tweaking their defensive system this season. And then you look at situations, look at the first Austin Matthews goal last night. I mean, how do you let Austin Matthews sit wide open on the high slot without anybody near him? So you can tell there's still some confusion going on assignments and everything like that. Even the overtime goal, 2 guys on one, that's a cardinal sin in overtime. You cannot do that. And they just look like they're just not in sync and not on the same page and trying to figure this out. So yeah, the number of games has been high for Johansson. Matt Tompkins, the backup, has only started 2 games to this point. We'll see if Tompkins gets the start tonight in Montreal. But Johansson's been fine. It's the players in front of him. And last night was almost a microcosm of their season. Spurts of just dominant hockey, and then they just disappear. Like, they just can't get out of their own end. Pucks are not getting past the blue line, as they're trying to clear and get their transition game going, and they get caught in their own end, and they scramble to try and find the zone coverage, and that's what's kind of really hurting this team right now.
Erik, I want to ask you a little bit about Sergachev, and going back over the course of his time in Tampa Bay, he's always had other guys in front of him. Obviously Hedman, but there's been McDonough, and there's been other players like Shattenkirk came in, was a righty who played at the point. Now all of a sudden, Sergachev's getting time on the first power play. We've seen that early on in the season. Sergachev's minutes are higher. He's really getting that opportunity to show that he's not just Victor Hedman's wingman, but maybe he could be a true number 1 defenseman in the NHL. What have you seen from him this season? Do you feel like he's finally taking that step and growing into that role, or is it just too inconsistent for your liking?
It almost feels like he's taken a little bit of a step back this year. Everything is there with Mikhail Sergachev's game, the offensive game, the physical game. That's something that really kind of blossomed over the past couple of years. It's the decision-making. It's the decision-making that's kind of holding him back a little bit. And you saw it on the overtime winning goal last night where, he wasn't sure if he was supposed to stay with Nylander or if he was supposed to peel off. And by the time you figure that out, it's a 2-on-1 and the Leafs end up winning the game. So it's those type of decisions that's kind of hurting his game right now. And those are correctable, right? Those are, especially for a guy who has played as many games in the NHL as he has already, even at the age of, I think he's 25 now. So he is taking on a bigger role. There's no doubt. The big contract, I always look at this too. When guys kind of hit that first home run contract, how do they handle it? Sometimes, I saw Marty St. Louis go through this. When he signed his first really big contract, he struggled. Brad Richards struggled on that first big money contract. And I kind of get the sense that's where Sergachev is now. But there's just so much skill there that I think he'll figure it out. But he just has to be better with his puck decisions and his zone coverage. Everything else is there for Sergachev.
Eric, I think whenever the Leafs and Lightning clash, the one big thing we're always looking for is where do these two teams stack up together in relation to one another in the Atlantic? And I guess you come away from a game like that ended up being lopsided, and then the Leafs control play for a while and it ends in overtime. And you see these two teams tied in the standings. You go, okay, that makes sense. But I wanted to ask about the sort of mantra. Look, John Cooper's he's a super sharp guy. He knows that all the microphones are in front of him whenever he comes to Toronto. He had a similar opportunity in Ottawa before they even got there to kind of get out this message of, hey, don't forget about us. We're still relevant. Have you noticed, different teams take on different sort of personalities as they get to varying points in their competitive cycle? Is that what the Lightning are kind of pushing now? And it's not an underdog, but it's like, hey, just to let you know, we're still here.
Would middle dog, would that kind of be a good phrase to put things? Because you're right. A lot of, outside prognosticators and us in the media a lot of times look at this team and go, they're getting older. They've had a lot of hockey under their wing and, they're going to fall off a cliff. And I think that John Cooper is using that to their advantage. He's going to try and put that little chip on their shoulder because this is still a competitive team. And I mean, you look at where they're at without Andrei Vasilevskiy. They've been able to kind of munch some points. They've let points get away. I mean, both games against the Leafs this year, they've had multi-goal leads and let them get away, end up losing in overtime. So they've let some of those points get away from them, or they'd be in a much better situation than they are right now. But I think that they are using that, to their advantage because Steven Stamkos is 33. Victor Hedman will be 33 next month. But this is not an aging core at the same time. That's the one thing about this team. And Nikita Kucherov is 30. Andrei Vasilevskiy is 29 or 30. Braden Point's 28. Anthony Cirelli's 25. We mentioned Sergachev, he's 25. Brandon Hagel's 24, 25. So they have a tier of core players, if you will, that are not all at the same level of their experience in games played and everything else. So I think with, the Nick Pauls and, you bring in a guy like Luke Glendening, who's got the experience and, is a voice in the locker room, there are other elements that they're trying to bring in to keep this team competitive. And I think they are a competitive team. They're going to have to figure out their defensive situation because you can't continue to give up 4 or 5 goals a night and expect to make the playoffs. But I think they will. This is not the first time we've kind of seen this from this Lightning team, even though the personnel is a little bit different this year, that they take a little bit to kind of figure out what their team identity is. And as long as you're munching points while you're doing that, and I know the Atlantic is a lot more competitive this year, but as long as you're getting those points, I think this Lightning team will figure it out. And I think they'll still be one of the top 3 teams in the division by the time we get to April.
Well, they're there right now. And something tells me if you had gotten to this point, 12 games in, 5-3-4 without Andrei Vasilevskiy continuing, as you said, to pile up points, that they'd be pretty happy with that. Some of those defensive miscues, of course, will end up being covered up by one of the best in the game in Vasilevskiy when he comes back. Thanks to Erik Eriendsson for joining us today. You can find his great work at lightninginsider.com. And this has been the All 32 delivered by DoorDash.
Thanks, guys.
All right, Colby, time for our inbox question of the day. Thanks to everyone who's been firing some stuff in on the chat on YouTube. And this one comes from Bera. He says, Quentin Byfield finally arriving has got me thinking, what's the status of Alex Turcotte, former 5th overall pick that I haven't heard much about in recent years? Is he part of the Kings' plans? It's interesting, Bera, that you asked that. I think there's a number of teams around the league that have kept a pretty close eye on Turcotte and his development, maybe seeing if he's one of those guys that could be the odd man out in LA. Colby, have you seen anything from Turcotte that might warrant an exploration by teams?
I mean, look, anytime a player has that 5th overall tag next to his name, there's always going to be exploration. But, going back to his days at Wisconsin, where I did quite a number of his games and he was playing on a loaded team with Caulfield and Miller, you name it. And I really was never overly impressed with him. I didn't see any one thing that really stood out to me. Did a lot of things okay and maybe a lot of things well, but I didn't see blazing speed. I didn't see blazing offensive ability. I didn't see blazing incredible hockey IQ or passing ability. So he's just a guy who has yet to put it together at the NHL level. And I agree, you just don't really hear much about him. Having said that, though, Frank, everybody develops at a different pace. But I would say that the rope is probably getting shorter and shorter for him as you start to transition from being a prospect to a suspect in a lot of different teams' eyes. That was the old joke when you were in the American League: prospect, suspect, depth player. You don't want to start creeping into that suspect category. And I think Turcotte is probably starting to dip his toe into that area.
Yeah, it's also tough when there's not really a ton of runway ahead of you. There's not open spots for you to jump in and grab because the Kings are kind of locked and loaded at forward. But you were thinking maybe there's a chance after trading away basically their entire third line to Winnipeg, could he possibly find one of those spots? Yet to be the case. I wanted to ask you quickly, if you were Rick Tocchet, would you have challenged the Leon Draisaitl goal on Monday night? I was shocked that they didn't after Thatcher Demko was taken out. He didn't move. He was still kind of in the way. But if the goalie doesn't have the ability to make the save, isn't that the definition of goalie interference?
I just don't think the juice is worth the squeeze on that play, Frank, because you really don't want to give McDavid and Draisaitl another opportunity on the power play if you're wrong. I think it's one of those areas where, yeah, you probably could have maybe been successful, but you're ahead in the game. They get a goal. You don't want to then put them on a power play if you were wrong and really give that momentum an opportunity to get going. And especially no matter how bad the Oilers have been, they still have McDavid and they still have Draisaitl, and Bouchard is a heck of a power play point defenseman. So I actually don't mind that Rick Tocchet didn't throw the challenge flag there and then believed in his team that they could seal off the momentum and continue to get it done. And it worked out.
Yeah, that's a good point. I never really think about the sort of what if part on the back end of it, because then you gift the team a goal and then all of a sudden, like you said, you throw them on the power play. That could be a big momentum swing. It looked to me like textbook goalie interference. Goalie gets taken out, can't make his way back to the net. Like, to me, it seemed cut and dry. And by the way, I checked in with the NHL last night to understand, and they said the Canucks would have been well within their right to challenge. Not something that we see all that often.
The other thing, Frank, and I think we've come to learn this over the years, the more cut and dry we may think it is, it usually goes the other way. And I think coaches are well aware of that on the bench. I think Rick Tocchet is well aware of the odds on those situations. And I think ultimately I liked the decision not to do it.
Sometimes better to not find out the hard way. Let's get to our Betano daily bets, which are brought to you by Betano.ca. 19 plus, please play responsibly. I got 2 plays today, standing in for my guy, Tyler Yaremchuk. I am going to take the Colorado Avalanche on the puck line tonight at home against the New Jersey Devils. The Devils, of course, without Hughes and Hischier. That's a big blow to their depth, especially down the middle. And Colorado coming off of that 7-0 drubbing by the Vegas Golden Knights on Saturday night. I kind of feel like Colorado is going to bounce back here. You're thinking Colorado win by 1, hope to get an empty net, as everyone playing the puck line usually is praying for. And I'm going to go with the Flyers and Sharks over 6.5 goals. I know. Until the Sharks don't give up 10 in a game, I'm taking the over every time. Carter Hart still out for the Flyers. This seems like the perfect play. I don't know why anyone wouldn't be hopping in on this with these two teams lining up in San Jose on Tuesday night. What do you think?
I'm just laughing. You had to throw that shot in at Mike Greer and David Quinn. They just seem to.
When you give up 10 goals for the first time in NHL history in back-to-back games since 1965, that just becomes.
Oh, it's fair.
Yeah.
It's fair. I'm not saying it's not fair. I wouldn't want to be walking into that dressing room right now.
Well, they apparently got an earful from Mike Greer on Monday. So he was saying everyone needs to be better. The whole thing, the Sharks had a team meeting and Mike Greer apparently let everyone have it after a really embarrassing pair of performances. Colby, that brings us to garbage time. And you wanted to highlight an anniversary, 55 years to the day since what?
Well, look, I'm just excited that you gave me garbage time today. Usually you like to hog this segment all to yourself. So, we're going to go stick taps, Frank. I'm going to take a page out of your book and give a little bit of love to Red Berenson. How about 55 years ago, scored 6 goals against the Philadelphia Flyers. And I'll tell you, Red's 83 years old now. And I've heard from some of the players at Michigan, he could still lace him up and he could still skate. I remember being recruited to Michigan, sitting at Red Berenson's office as a 15, 16-year-old hockey player. And my dad was telling me about when he scored 6 goals against the Flyers in his professional career. He's quite an intense guy, but a Hockey Hall of Famer, a lifer to the game of hockey, a great ambassador. He's built an incredible program at Michigan. I know he's still around. I know he still every now and again gets in the coach's ears of the University of Michigan, was one of our biggest rivals in college. Anytime you see that maize and blue and you suit up at Yost Arena, which is basically the house that he built, it's really impressive. So good for him. Good to see him still doing well. He's still in shape. He's still a healthy guy. So like I said, I'll take a page out of your book and go stick taps to Red Berenson.
6 goals in a game ties the NHL's modern day record. Darryl Sittler, of course, did it 8 years later with the Toronto Maple Leafs in his 10-point game in 1976. But 55 years ago today, Red Berenson's 6 goals, the NHL all-time record, if you were curious, is 7, held by Joe Malone, one of the best early era NHL players. So with that, got to remind you about our Wendy's Daily Faceoff Survivor Pool. If you were in the game on Monday and you woke up this morning and you looked at our site, we had a little bit of a data glitch. So this has now been corrected. So if you were correct in your day 1 pick, you can now go back in on day 2 and make a selection to keep going in our daily face-off survivor pool. I'm riding on Travis Konechny, who's been ultra hot to start the year. I've got him scoring a goal, at least 1 goal tonight for the Flyers against those San Jose Sharks. But keep it going in our Wendy's daily face-off survivor pool. It's been a lot of fun so far. The second week of the game, you can play for season-long prizes in addition to free meals at Wendy's. There's nothing worse than your pick being ice cold or your burger being ice cold. That's why Wendy's is offering prizes all season long with our Wendy's Daily Face-Off Survivor Pool. So while you obsess over your picks, reward that dedication with Wendy's new obsession, the very real barbecue bacon cheeseburger, freshly added to the Wendy's lineup. Enjoy the applewood smoked bacon and crispy onions as cheese melts over the fresh, never frozen Canadian beef. Sign up for the Wendy's Daily Face-Off Survivor Pool today at dailyfaceoffsurvivor.com. Colby, that'll do it for today's edition of Daily Face-Off Live. Thanks for riding as my wingman today. We'll be back 12 noon Eastern on Wednesday. We'll talk to you then.
Thanks for tuning in to Daily Face-Off Live. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to never miss an episode.